Hi, this is Mike Regan, and it is my pleasure to welcome our good friend Jerry Hempstead back for a discussion about what's going on in the parcel market. Now, I know it's a little bit unusual because we heard from Jerry very recently when he was explaining the surcharge that UPS and FedEx have come up with for their largest customers. But we've also seen some very unusual things happening in the parcel marketplace and the ground marketplace. So, Jerry, I'd like to say thank you for taking the time to join us and help us understand what the heck is going on in the parcel and ground marketplace.
Well, it's been an interesting year, to say the least. So we had a sterling fourth quarter of 2019, record volumes for UPS and FedEx and the Postal Service. January started out just fine. Volumes started to fall back to normal, and then COVID hit. And so what became the new normal, I hate that phrase, the new normal, is that you and I and our wives and our children are now procuring just about everything via the internet. Instacart has become a huge success, at least in my house. We don't go to the grocery store anymore. We go online, we pick out the stuff we want, and they bring it to the house, and we have no social interaction because of fear of getting the COVID. Well, what has that done to the carriers? Well, with everybody buying online, the volumes have continued to grow month after month, and now we are at volumes beyond what we saw in December of 2019. So that period of time between Thanksgiving and Christmas, where the doors get blown off and everybody can understand why shipments are delayed, we're beyond those numbers now. And so looking out on the horizon, we are a week away from Labor Day, when peak season begins, because the creep has occurred. The peak season starts to trickle in right after Labor Day and runs all the way up to Christmas Day. The volumes continue to build, with the extraordinary volumes between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So what's happened? Because of all the volume, there's only so much flow the sewage pipe can handle. And stuff is backing up in the pipe. And stuff is percolating up into hubs. And we're getting reports almost daily now, two major ones in the past week, one in Raleigh that was in the papers, and then one in Norcross, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, different hub, same carrier, unfortunately, where volume has been sitting for a very long period of time. And they just have not been able to dig their way out of this onslaught of packages, because every day when they open up the doors, a new load of packages show up, and they still haven't cleaned up the ones from the day before. And so this just been rolling down the road on them, and people are missing packages. People are being told we don't know when it's going to be delivered. And we've got this huge problem now in the pipeline with FedEx, with UPS, with the Postal Service. And I'm even hearing from the regional carriers that they are experiencing extraordinary volume peaks now. And we haven't even gotten into peak season yet.
Okay, so Jerry, against that backdrop, it's safe to say that from an infrastructure perspective, we're running either at or pretty close to peak capacity. We can't handle a lot more volume into the system. Is that an accurate assessment?
Pretty much so. There are some things that the carriers can do to mitigate some of this, but the big switches, the hubs, the automation, the technology piece, you need to plan that a year, 2 years, 3 years ago. And nobody had any idea 3 years ago that we would be experiencing what we're experiencing today. So yes,
okay, so
had overbuilt, but now that capacity is being consumed.
Okay, so what we're seeing are some real anomalies in the marketplace. So a couple of months ago, one of the reasons we had you on a couple of months ago was to explain the logic behind the imposition of surcharges by UPS and FedEx for their biggest customers. I mean, that's not something you would normally see where you'd say you'd single out, but they basically said, we're going to take a look at your volume in February of 2020, pre-COVID. And if your volume exceeds that by certain thresholds, which varied from UPS to FedEx, we're going to impose a per package surcharge. Now, let's go a couple of months further. And one of the reasons why I got an email and I immediately picked up the phone and gave you a call was because we're hearing instances where UPS and FedEx have, in essence, for lack of a better way of saying it, and I'm sure you may have a different way of expressing it, which is more subtle than mine, but they are in essence firing some of their customers. And that is something that has really gotten the attention of a bunch of folks, because consistent with firing a customer, it's not like if you're a UPS customer and you get walloped, FedEx is there waiting with open arms saying, come home to mama, because they don't have the capacity. So that has created, I think, a sense of concern for shippers about what their options are with respect to getting large numbers of packages delivered as the way, consistent with the way they've always done it within their supply chain. I know that's a lengthy description, but it seems like that's a certifiable mess. Help us unclog the mess.
Okay, so if you're a shipper and you're listening to this, there's a couple of dynamics that you need to be aware of that are going on, and then what could be your strategy to protect yourself moving into the fourth quarter. So the business we are talking about, for the most part, is e-commerce business, and it's B2C. It's business to consumer. It's residential deliveries. For the carriers, it means single piece delivery stops for the most part. It means bulky stuff. I don't know if you've ever experienced it. I experience it all the time. You open up an Amazon box and it's 70% air inside the box. So they're bulky, they're residential, they're single stop, and they're problematic. And then the biggest guys, because of their size, over time have commanded the lowest rates. So I'll call it profitless prosperity on the part of UPS and FedEx. They've got all this business, but they're not making any money on it. And the more business they get, the less money they make. As odd as that sounds. So what is their strategy? Well, number one, they put in surcharges, but I'm also hearing that they are putting either caps on the amount of business that a shipper will be able to tender, especially in the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Here's how many packages you did last year. Here's how many we're going to allow you to ship this year. When you hit that threshold, we're not coming to pick you up. Imagine that, right? So you're there, the business is coming in like crazy over the internet, and you got no way to get your product to your consumer. The other thing is that they are imposing price increases on some shippers, and some of the listeners may have already heard from their carriers about price increases. And I've heard in the background from peddlers on the street that their managers pretty much have said, and if the shipper leaves, we don't care.
So wait, time out. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. So the negotiating posture, from what you've heard on the street, these peddlers that you're talking about are representatives for UPS and FedEx. And their marching orders have said, here's the price increases that we need. And what I hear you saying, putting on my magic decoder ring, is that we will be very aggressive in standing our ground on these increases that we're requesting.
It's
to the point where
it's become a seller's market.
Okay, and if the buyer doesn't want to pay the increases, wish him well.
Then what? Okay, and so here's my thought on that. How do you make yourself more marketable to the carrier? How do you come up with less?
Well, we used to call shipper friendly on the truckload and LTL side, but shipper friendly for parcel.
So how can you help? Well, there are regional carriers out there. The West Coast from Washington all the way down to New Mexico has a carrier called Ontrack. And they are small parcel, and they're residential, and they're e-commerce, and they are what this business is all about. And they do an extraordinary job, especially if you can deposit your volume into their hub in Reno. They pretty much give West Coast delivery next day if you can deposit it into their hub. In your area, Mike, where you are, you're in the Great Lakes area, there's a couple of companies, one called Speedy, the other one called UDS, United Delivery Service.
UDS?
UDS, United Delivery. And they have hubs in your area. So I think UDS is in Lombard or somewhere in that vicinity. Again, if you deposit it in their hub by the critical hour, you'll get next day delivery of all of those packages on a regional basis. And with OnTrack and with UDS and with some of the other regionals, you'll get a price lower than you were enjoying from the big guys. Texas and Oklahoma is served by LSO, Lone Star Overnight. You can deposit your stuff in their hub in Dallas, I think. On the East Coast, there's a company called Lasership, and you can deposit into their hubs and get big footprints of delivery. So now you've taken your business and managed it down where it may become more tolerable to the big guys, that the chunk of business that you have to tender to them is less. And they can decide
what kind of business potentially would you be tendering to them if you went aggressively into a regional carrier network configuration?
Oh, I think you can easily cut your business in half with a depositing in the regional carrier strategy. I did some math for one customer. About between 25 and 33% of his business was covered by the OnTrack footprint. Of course, in the Great Lakes, you've got a very good population density. Lone Star does Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. They do all the big cities in Texas. Lasership does the major cities on the East Coast. And so you can carve out fairly big chunks of business so that it's not as oppressive to the carriers if you can get them to talk to you. And you say, listen, we'll help you out. We'll cut down some of this volume that's choking your network, and let's work together on this rather than as work as partners rather than enemies.
Okay, so now
another chunk of the business, and we need to talk about it, is especially shipments that are under a pound, which a lot of e-commerce business is a less than a pound, and it's shipments that are being handled by FedEx SmartPost and UPS SurePost, and we're seeing complaints, obviously, about the Postal Service in the press. And I've heard word from some of the carriers, the big integrators, that they have too much of this small business, which is low-yielding business. Then what? What if they come in and they say, we don't want your under 1 pound stuff anymore, or we want it with a $5 surcharge? Then you may not want to give it to them because it'll ruin your profit margin, especially if these are low-priced items that you're shipping. So then what? Well, fortunately for you, shipper, there are other alternatives. So most people think that DHL is no longer a domestic carrier, and that's true in the express business, the domestic express business, but it's not true for e-commerce. They have a subsidiary company called DHL e-commerce that is set up for this, that uses the Postal Service for the last mile. They're headquartered in Weston, Florida. They have a sales force throughout the United States, and they'll pick up your stuff and they'll deposit it downline within the postal stream at the post office closest to the recipient's home at a very inexpensive price. Pitney Bowes has a division. They bought a company called Nugistics several years ago. Again, it's a company that will sort your shipments by DDU and deposit them downstream into the postal network for last mile delivery. And you got to remember that the Postal Service by law has to go to every residence 6 days a week, whether you want the guy to come to your house with your bills or not, he's coming. So he's got a truck, he's got a vehicle, he's got a terminal. These guys, FedEx, UPS, DHL, Pitney Bowes, they deposit the mail at the post office closest to your home where the guy originates from in the morning, and he puts it on his truck and he brings it to your house, and it shouldn't get delayed. It gets delayed when you tender it at a post office in Chicago, coming to me in Florida, and it's got to move through the entire postal network, going through their hubs, which are clogged. So how do you avoid that? Well, you use one of these zone skippers, FedEx, UPS, DHL, Pitney Bowes, to get around all of that and deposit the mail into the post office that's delivering to your home. And so if your rep comes to you and you're with one of the big guys and they say, either we don't want your business anymore, or we need to give you an extraordinary increase, an extraordinary percentage increase on your business in order for us to be attracted enough to handle it, you have other people you can call. It's not like the integrator business where you only got two to call now, FedEx and UPS.
Okay, now help me understand. I'm dealing with companies that have traditionally relied upon FedEx and UPS to handle 98%, or the UPS or the United States Postal Service to handle a significant majority, like 99% of my shipments. Help walk me through, how do I set up that regional carrier network?
Well, in order to take advantage of it, depending on how many distribution facilities you have, and let's say hypothetically you only have one that you're distributing from. How do you take advantage of, let's say, OnTrack if you're located in Columbus, Ohio? Well, you are going to have to sort your packages for OnTrack's footprint. And they'll give you the list of zip codes that they service. You cull that business out, use their app to label the packages for OnTrack, and 5 times a week, 4 times a week, 7 times a week, you load up a trailer or a truck and you send it to the OnTrack hub in Reno. They, I think, require that you send them an advance ship notice that a truck is coming and what's on the truck, so they're prepared for it, but there's a whole process for that. And the same thing with UDS, that you induct your shipments via truck from your place into their hub, in UDS's case, Lombard, I think it is, and then they'll take it from there. They can aid and assist you in getting the line haul truck from your place to them, or you can take it upon yourself to, or call Transact. They'll help you arrange for a truck to go from Columbus to Reno with all of your small packages.
Great advice, Jerry. Okay.
Ask for Dana. Don't ask for Mike. Yeah. Ask for Dana.
How long does it take to set that up?
Well, the carriers, OnTrack, UDS, and so forth, need to set you up in their computer system and put your pricing in and that kind of stuff. And they like the integrators, will negotiate price and conditions with you and accessorial charges. So you've got more players on that chunk of the business. You'll probably end up with a price you get that's much better than the integrators for the business than you can carve out and give to them. And it usually takes them about a week. But here's the problem. They're looking out on the horizon, and there's only so much business they're going to be able to take at Christmas. So the time to act, and I'm glad you called me today, time to act is now. Because when we start moving through September, tomorrow's September, these guys won't be taking on customers, or they'll be less likely to be generous with any discount that you might want to get.
Okay, Jerry, so right now it's obviously a seller's market. How long do you continue to see it being a seller's market?
Good question. So FedEx and UPS are publicly traded companies. The regional carriers are privately held. And the Postal Service is its own animal. But FedEx and UPS have to deliver to shareholders. Now, the number one thing you have to deliver to shareholders is earnings. And the street looks for earnings growth and they look for revenue growth, top line. But the new president of UPS, Carol Tomei, said on the call just recently, the Wall Street call, that she wasn't all that interested in revenue growth. She's more interested in quality revenue growth. And that's almost like a dog whistle that we're not just going to grow packages for the sake of packages or revenue for the sake of revenue. We're going to manage our yields on the business we take in through the door and make some real money on what we're handling. And
Okay,
so you may see it acceptable from Raj at FedEx and Carol at UPS that they don't have top line revenue growth, and that may be okay.
Well, one of the things you said earlier is that if there is significant growth that doesn't yield a comparable level of profitability, you need to take a step back. It's as one of my former mentors who passed away, Sammy Rubenstein, used to remind me, if your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall. Okay? So, having said that, in our 2-minute warnings, Jerry, we've been talking about various budget issues, and we've covered truckload, ocean, and LTL, et cetera. For 2021, what kind of increases should shippers be looking at on their ground and parcel budgets, percentage-wise?
Well, historically, they've announced either a 4.9 or a 5.9% general rate increase, the GRI, the lift of the base rates. Most of the listeners to this broadcast are going to have some kind of negotiated cap in their contracts already on how much that lift is, be it 3%, 4%, 4.5%. If they have it in there, they're not taking the full brunt of that. What's not protected in most of that language is increases to the accessorial charges. They don't count.
Right.
Often not included is the increase to the minimum charge. So you might have an 80% discount on your ground business, but you don't get to enjoy it if you've agreed to pay the minimum charge. And a big percentage of your business is 1 to 10 pounds, where you're hitting the minimum charge in all the cells. Well, when the minimum goes up, you take that full increase all across the board on those shipments that took the increase in the minimum charge. And we've talked about the impact of minimum increases in the past. So how much do I think is coming? Because of what's going on in the marketplace right now, my tummy tells me they're going to find a way to get something more than 5.9. Now, never underestimate the ability for them to be creative and come up with a surcharge for a package that has no surcharge on it.
My concern, Jerry, is, we've been friends a long time. You've talked about GRIs, and, we've talked about when is a 4.95% increase, not a 4.95% increase. When I get done factoring in all the accessorial charges, we've seen, all sorts of different things. I'm a $4 million budget. What percentage increase should I factor in my budget?
I think you need to plan for the 5.9. It may come in as a change in dimensional weight, a change in the accessorials, a change in the minimum charge, but I would plan for that. They're going to find a way to extract their pound of flesh.
Okay. Now, let me just also, for that shipper that really isn't looking ahead to November, because they're just trying to get through September and October, okay? Do you have any tips or advice for how they're going to get their packages moved if the network doesn't get unclogged, or as you said, the pipe doesn't get unclogged?
A couple of strategies. Number one, you should be talking regularly to your designated carrier's rep at least once a week. As important, you need to develop a relationship, if you don't have one already, with the competing carrier rep. So you got one guy who's already got your business. He wants to keep it because he gets paid a spiff on it. And there's somebody on the outside looking in that you have business that he wants, and he would happily convert that business to his book if he can figure out how to do it. So you need to be carrying on a relationship with those two guys. If you're interested in having a relationship with the regional carriers, you need to be talking to them. You need to talk to OnTrack, talk to UDS, talk to LSO, and so on. And if your listeners need contact information for those carriers, they can come to you and you get the information from me, or I can give you the phone numbers of the guys at those companies that would take calls from your listeners. So that's number one. Number two, when should you start negotiating your contract with the carrier? The moment you think of it. Very few contracts have penalty language, although the carriers, both big ones, are trying to insert language into the contracts where there is a penalty if you open up your business prior to its expiration date or along its life. They're trying to insert that. You don't have to accept it. But most contracts today don't have that penalty language for opening up your contract. So if you have a contract with, let's say, FedEx, can you call them up and say, I want to negotiate it now? You bet. There's nothing that prevents you. Or if there's something about the contract you don't like, this new fee, for example, that's coming up in the week between Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's $2 a Smart Post package. I don't want to pay that. We saw what happened earlier in the year when you called me about the change in the additional handling fee. I said, tell them to go back to their sales rep and ask for 75% off. Bingo. Was not a problem. And so everything is negotiable. Look where you're spending your money. The carriers can provide reports to you of which accessorials that you're paying for and how many times they're hitting you up for it. That should be the first place you go hunting.
You know, with our parcel reporting toolbox, Jerry, that you helped design there, you know, one of the great things that we have there is the ability to isolate all the charges there to assess what the likelihood that you're going to be experiencing increases. So, you know, the heavy handling surcharge pack, you know, when they reduce the weight, which that surcharge applies, you know, we're able to go out to customers and tell them exactly how many packages had occurred over the past 12 months that would now be subject to that surcharge and things like that. Jerry, as we close this out, I want to say thank you for your time, but I also want to ask, you know, we touched on this briefly, and you talked about the CEO of UPS saying that they want quality earnings, not necessarily just volume, quantity of volume. Okay. So after the, you know, 2021 comes around, are we looking at some kind of relief after the second quarter, you know, heading into the third quarter? Do you think we're going to see the come back to being more balanced in terms of a buyer and seller's market?
Well, there's two components to it. The big problem right now is the ground business, in particular the B2C ground business. The air business is doing just fine. As a matter of fact, because of so many businesses still being closed, the B2B air business is down. So that component of your business, if that's where you live as a shipper, now it's a good time to be talking to your rep about that, because they could use some business in that realm. But if you're a B2C bulky ground shipper, you're between a rock and a hard place right now. So coming into next year, depending on what happens with COVID, I mean, that's the dark place we're all in. We don't know what's going to happen. They may be starving for business for their airplanes come the second quarter.
Okay, so then you're saying that capacity gets better and we get back to a more traditional relationship between the carriers and the shippers.
Mm-hmm. Well,
okay.
In the second quarter, you're
Jerry,
going to be dealing with year over year.
And what does that mean?
There's going to be pressure on the two big carriers to grow the business over this year, which was influenced by COVID. So they're going to.
Will they have the capacity to grow the business?
I doubt it.
So then, how do they maintain comparable year-over-year data if they don't have the business, the capacity to grow the business.
Unfortunately for your listeners, they need to raise the price.
Okay, that's what I was, that's where I was headed. So, listen, anything else that I've missed here, Jerry?
No. You're good at this.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. If folks are interested in talking with you, we can certainly pass along your contact info. The best email address, Jerry, to reach you at is gmhempstead, HEMPSTAD at AOL.com. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Perfect. Jerry, thanks so much for your time. Look forward to
Thank you,
future
Michael.
discussions.